I think if you're driven, then you've probably got a vision, which is great. And I think if you follow that, whether it's about starting a business, if you have an idea, just go with it. Identify a plan, make sure that plan is flexible, ensure that perhaps the entry point is not necessarily exit, and I think that's more about, as we said before, a vocation necessarily than a career path.
Yeah.
I think the C word is kind of a misnomer. I don't think you need, all of those fixed points that you discussed before. If you have an idea, you can go out and make things happen. You just need to be committed to it. That's all.
Welcome back again to the Stephen Sully Study. We have been doing a art series over the last few weeks with key artists from America. We're now branching over to UK artists as well as art collectors, anyone who's influenced the art market and anyone who's been in the sector of art. My next guest in front of me, Marcus Vinton, has certainly played a big part in that. As some of the viewers know, certainly from Woodbury House's side of things, we have been a brand since 2014 and we found ourselves coming into the art market by chance. Over the last 7 years or so as a brand, we've definitely evolved and we've got a new e-commerce side to the business, which is an online store where you're going to find merchandise, collectibles, limited editions, etc. As well as the advisory side, which is helping people to collect, invest and to build an art portfolio. And some of the new key individuals have come on board at Woodbury House as key members, or in Marcus' case, as a non-exec director. And it's just good to hear his story and obviously where he believes our company's going and also the art market. So welcome on board, Marcus.
Thanks, Steve. Great pleasure to be here.
Cool. So naturally, I want to talk to you about your grassroots as a lad from Newcastle and how you got into business and basically your upbringing. Because me and you had a bit of a connection when we first got to know each other through boxing. Your old man was a boxer, right?
Absolutely right, Steve. Yeah, my dad was a pro boxer. My mum used to run clubs when I was a kid, so I'm very, very proud of my my Geordie heritage, which is kind of amazing, really. So a beautiful part of the world. I think probably early on, creativity was something that wasn't really schooled at that point. Mm-hmm. But I think my parents, certainly my mum, realised that I had sort of creative potential, and she sort of streamed out. We used to have an old gallery in town called the Lane Art Gallery, still there today, sort of a classic city gallery. And there were some key pieces in there. I remember a Henry Moore, for instance. Not that I knew where Henry Moore was at the time. So my mum would take me there every week, and I think that really helped in terms of my sort of creative development, which is really interesting.
Yeah, good stuff. So, when did you decide that you wanted to become an entrepreneur? Was that something that you just evolved into?
I'm not sure I am an entrepreneur. I think if you're creative, you have ideas for sure. And I think if you're lucky enough to be around great people, you realize that from a commercial perspective, money and investment tends to follow creativity, I think, which is interesting. So I think that spirit now is enabled, and technology has probably done that and is a key motivator for it. So I think at a very early age, I certainly wasn't aware of that. My schooling was traditional. I went on to do a degree, and awards are fine, and I guess qualifications are fine, but you need to have a place in the real world to make those things kind of function, and that's what happened.
Yeah, well, you probably know, I've said a few times about my background. I didn't really sort of, there was no synergy between me and school. I didn't really enjoy it. You speak to some people, quite a lot of people, and they say, yeah, the school years were the best years. For me, I hated school, and I'm being completely blunt about it. Yeah. Didn't enjoy it whatsoever, but what I've always been good at is committing and staying at, in something, even if I'm rubbish at it. I never took any days off of school, and I committed, but I knew that when I got out of school, I had to do something a little bit more different to the conventional, because I didn't come out of school with great education, great qualifications. Part of my giving back, the reason why I set up the Stephen Sully Study, my podcast, is because when I was younger, there was no such thing as podcasts. The only thing that you could see every so often was maybe a cool interview, but with an elite individual, an A-lister or iconic person who's having an interview with maybe a reporter. And even though it was inspiring, it was almost like, well, yeah, that's all right for you because you're Michael Jackson, or that's all right for you because you're Mike Tyson, or someone like that. And it was quite hard to relate to these people. So I feel if there was conversations like this when I was younger, it might have steered me or promoted me into doing something, slightly different.
Yeah.
And so going back to the point, part of the reason why I like to have these podcast interviews with key individuals is because I'm hoping to inspire, or this episode is hoping to inspire a young boy, a young girl who's thinking, I don't really know what I want to be in life. Oh, this episode has actually inspired me to do something now.
Yeah, not knowing is great. I think education, you can put too much emphasis. If the process is good, that's a great thing. At the same time, you can end up coming out of, GCSEs with A levels, S levels, that pushes you into a subject matter and a degree and probably a uni. 5 years later, you pop out thinking, well, why did I do that?
Yeah.
What has that prepared me for? So I think there's too much emphasis to that. I think if you can nurture talent and identify talent at a young age, it's a fantastic thing. And, to your point, technology, a podcast is maybe, certainly for you, you're mentoring, I think with a lot of the podcasts there, which is really, really valuable. Those things weren't available when I was a kid. Technology was just starting to happen. I guess I worked through what was called then new media at the birth of the internet, which is hard to believe because, to be in an environment, certainly at college, where everything was analog. So the thirst for information it was there, but there was no access points, and if you were rich enough to have books, maybe that would be a good thing for your family, but few people are. Now everything is at, touch.
Yeah,
which is perfect.
I think the age of social media and the internet is a blessing as well as a curse. Yeah. So it's a curse because of things like mental health issues and being distracted and comparing yourself to someone that you don't really know and that you're following a kind of a fake lifestyle. At the end of the day, people post what they want you to see rather than actually what goes on behind the scenes. And I think part of the reason why we started Mimboso, the platform, is to help people with that.
Absolutely. To
become the best version of themselves. We've got yourself involved with that now. We've got Sam, we have Ruben Tabares, my friend Alf, and we've got so many brand ambassadors which are helping that brand. But at the same time, that the blessing of it is, there's multiple different ways to generate revenue now. There's multiple different ways to become a success. There's multiple different avenues where you can go down to become, let's say, work in a career or even a job. But when I was going back to school, I literally had my head of year, I think it was, and even the headmaster say, like, if you don't get any grades, you literally will amount to nothing. And I would consider myself as quite strong-minded. I also consider myself as fairly, easygoing in some respects. I don't get really too pissed off quite easily. Yeah. But to some other kid back then, as a 15 or a 16-year-old or whatever, that could have really played on my emotions and even my mindset. Yeah. So going back to this is, I hope when people listen to these podcasts with all different kinds of people, they know that there are plenty of opportunities out there for them, and they can become a success with or without grades.
Yeah, quite right, Steve. You don't need. Grades are good. I think potentially they're a way of keeping score, but they mean very, very little in the real world. When kids step out of college or looking to find their feet, more for vocation than I think necessarily a career path. I think what I do see with the younger generation now is they're aware that they have multiple skill sets, and those skill sets can be applied to several verticals. It's not about coming out and going, I have to get a job in this, or that's it, I'm screwed. Or if I don't make the A grades, I won't make uni. If I don't make uni, that's it, life's over. That's terrible pressure, and it's just not realistic these days.
Yeah.
So you make a good point in that respect. I think mental health, technology is a fascinating piece. Clearly, on the back of celebrity culture, I don't want to get into a conversation there. Social media is a great thing in terms of building community and power, but it can also be, a very bad thing if it's not harnessed correctly.
Yeah.
So I think technology as an enabling tool, as a carrier for information, is really powerful. So when the medium is as important as the message, you have a great combination. Just in the same way that perhaps the music industry 10, 15 years ago was sort of liberated in some respects by technology when it thought it could be the death knell. I think that similar things will happen in other verticals. Certainly the art world, we'll go on to talk about that in a while, but that is experiencing something of a revolution. On the mental health side of technology, to your point, I couldn't agree more. I think it's very, very important. Mimboso is doing an amazing job. So I think the combination, especially through the last year, has been, just unprecedented. So the combination of having physical and mental fitness is really, really important.
Yeah.
And I think those two things go hand in hand, which is really important. One of the things I did when I was in advertising, which I'm very proud of actually, was help put together a foundation called CALM, Campaign Against Living Miserably.
Yeah.
I've done a lot of work for the Samaritan and helping them, but I could see that from a brand perspective, they were perhaps not as approachable or as contemporary as, was needed. So Calm was put together with Paul Boateng, Lord Paul Boateng, and the late great Tony from Factory Records up in Manchester, which was a great piece.
Yeah.
And that's still happening now, and I think it's providing a good job. The fact that I think young men especially can have a conversation, the dialogue is there about feeling down, and it's okay to have those issues. That's very much commonplace now, which I think is a powerful thing. And again, that's all about mentoring. And the same way you're utterly tenacious, super talented, driven, very successful. Those are great things, and they come with trappings, and they come with, I think the demarcation of success. But I think it's great to live your life through necessarily celebration rather than validation all the time. So whilst, the rewards and the spoils come with success, it's actually much, much better to have a clear drive in terms of your personal happiness and motivation.
Yeah.
That's what's really important. And anyone can do anything. They're all armed. Everyone has a phone now. Everyone has ideas. So you can go make stuff happen. You don't need a business degree. You don't need, a degree at all.
Yeah. Yeah. I think my sort of take on anyone that is, certainly from a younger demographic suffering from mental health issues, anxiety, depression, etc. I'm not saying I'm definitely far from an expert in that area, but my take on it is, sometimes they compare a beautiful woman or this, muscly guy who's fairly good looking, someone's from a rich background or this certain part of the world, or they're very educated, and they feel that if they don't have those boxes ticked or those credentials or those characteristics or that upbringing, they're never going to be a success. And what was drilled into me when I was younger, rightly or wrongly, I'm not going to try and blame the teachers, because maybe I have before in the past, but now on reflection, maybe they were trying to do it in a way where, they were saying to me, if you don't get good grades, you won't amount to nothing, to actually inspire me to go and try and get good grades. So I thank them for that. But I do feel there were certain individuals who literally thought that if you don't get good grades, you would be a complete failure in your life. And I'm here to tell you that if you've got motivation and drive and you're willing to be open-minded, you can become a success. And how life unfolds is you might go down certain paths that you never imagined you were going to go down, and suddenly you become a household name in that sector. I never in my wildest dreams ever thought when I was 16, 17 years of age, I was going to be running my own podcast, having Woodbury House as a brand, working with the Godfather Street Art, Richard Hambleton, doing shows at the Saatchi Gallery with your good self, Marcus, and, just doing some really cool shit,
Yeah.
and I never thought that was ever going to happen. And I think being open-minded and being positive is certainly, it opens many doors for you. Would you second that?
100%, Steve. I think if you're driven, then you've probably got a vision, which is great. And I think if you follow that, whether it's about starting a business, if you have an idea, just go with it. Identify a plan, make sure that plan is flexible, ensure that perhaps the entry point is not necessarily exit, and I think that's more about, as we said before, a vocation necessarily than a career path.
Yeah.
I think the C word is kind of a misnomer. I don't think you need, all of those fixed points that you discussed before. If you have an idea, you can go out and make things happen. You just need to be committed to it. That's all.
Yeah. So obviously I want to talk to you about what you're doing now, being, working alongside us, the art market, Richard Hambleton, all these exciting projects in the future. But for the viewers, obviously I got to know you, and I know that, you sit on the board at the Groucho, looking at your CV, as it were. You work for some of the biggest brands in the world. I think Ferrari on there, Maserati, ITV. I mean, I'm not going to go through them all because it's far too many to list. You've either been a big part of it or indirectly somehow a part of it. People do like to hear about successes as well. So I know we're not going to go into numbers, but some of the companies you've been a part of are founded and then sold.
Sure,
I think that will inspire people.
Yeah, I think I was very, very lucky at a young age to I guess blag my way into an advertising agency called BBH, Bardell Bogle Hegarty, an iconic agency which is now part of the larger Publicis group. A forefront agency where I was allowed to work on great accounts, but more importantly, there were great people around there who'd help me sell that work. We had great clients who would buy work. Very quickly, that gives you a profile, because if that work's good, you tend to win awards, and if the awards are there, it's because the creativity has been effective. So it works through the commercial, which is really, really interesting. I think I was also very, very fortunate to be, at the birth of the internet, really, or just after. So I think we had kind of new media moving to interactive and then to digital, full digital. So some of the larger brands, Fortune 500 organizations, didn't have really an online presence. So I think I was lucky and curious to think that actually if we transfer brand equity, IP, and great ideas into what was then primarily web, pre-applications and devices, that could be a powerful piece. So that kind of fast-tracked me into large boardrooms. So before I knew it, I was sitting in a PepsiCo boardroom or a Ford boardroom or Unilever, unprecedented access that I would never have got, certainly just kind of working through the traditional path with advertising. So that was a huge help and success. I think out of that comes opportunity. Content was a big space for me. And again, I was lucky to be in great organizations, primarily running digital comms for WPP out of Ogilvy. Then later Publicis with Maurice Levy. Having access to the founders myself was just an amazing thing. At the time, I didn't probably quite appreciate how lucky I was to be around such a very influential circle of talent. But that helped enormously. I think once you build a commitment to that point, you can work very happily within a large organization and you can get paid handsomely, and that's fantastic. But it's always important to never get complacent. You've got to keep driving forward and looking for new opportunities.
Hence my saying, be happy, never content.
Absolutely. I think that keeps you relevant, and I think hopefully it keeps you young, actually. So I think if you're interested in the life and world around you, then you've got a value role to play, and that's really, really important. I think when it comes to starting businesses, everyone's a CEO now, doesn't matter how old you are. Everyone's talking multiple exit points, and actually that's fine. But if you have that level of ambition, but I think identifying where there's an opportunity in the market, and probably more importantly, identifying where there's a market in the gap is really, really essential. So whether that's a Me Too business, it's important to kind of imitate rather than imitate. Look where the opportunities sit. Out of COVID, some amazing opportunities have also arisen that probably wouldn't have been there without the kind of political and social unrest that we've had around us. Yeah. So that brings opportunity, adverse, but it brings opportunity. I think when it comes to building a plan and building an organization, some ideas are so big, you need backing. If you're suddenly into a position where you're looking for funding, I look at the businesses that are happening fast through crowdfunding now, and it's quite amazing. So to have that community around you is really powerful. Of course, there's traditional, PE, VC routes that are a lot more traditional and probably a lot slower. The level of governance there is a lot harder, but funding is out there for creativity and funding is out there for great ideas. And ultimately, I think any investor will back the human resource rather than necessarily the plan. Mm-hmm. So
the resourcefulness of the individuals,
if you're sitting across the desk to someone, maybe the plan needs a pivot, maybe it needs some help. But if you really believe and buy into the power, commitment, and tenacity of the people on the other side of the table, then probably investment will follow, which is really good.
I'm actually currently listening to a podcast. His name is, the founder of the podcast is called Tim or Tom Birilu or something like that, American guy. Yeah. Obviously I've pronounced the surname completely wrong there, but he's interviewing the founder of Netflix, and they're talking about this very subject. Said that, if you share your ideas with friends and family members, especially, let's say, your mum and dad and stuff, who are very protective over you emotionally and also from making mistakes, a lot of them, not out of being malicious, but just out loving you and protecting you, they would say that the idea probably isn't a good one and it's not going to work. And he said there is a lot of truth in that, because the first few ideas, the actual idea you come up with probably won't work, but you need to tweak it. He said what does work, Chloe, is the resourcefulness and the drive of the individual to find a way to make that idea or some form of that idea work. And Netflix, bearing in mind, it's a multi-billion-dollar organisation now, took over basically from Blockbuster. Famously, Blockbuster tried to buy them out a couple of times, and they Netflix tried to buy out Blockbuster a few times and turned it down. But they had the same model where they were sending out DVDs to people, and it was a failing kind of business model. And they tweaked and pivoted, and now they've become a massive organisation. Going back to what you were saying and reinforcing what you were just talking about there, it really is about the resourcefulness of individuals that makes a sector or a market or a company or a brand thrive, especially in times of like Corona, lockdown, and also pending looming recession. I think it either makes you this sort of certain environment, or it does break you. And it's okay to be broken every so often. There's no shame in that. It's about how you bounce, not break, and it's about how you come back from that.
Yeah, there's no shame in getting knocked down. It's just you've got to get up.
Yeah.
That's what's important. And, you know, the on-demand world that we live in, which is device-led, is an amazing playground. You know, the tools are there. You don't have to build those things. They're off the shelf. So if you've got an idea that can work, you can make it happen. So exactly, I think those pivots that you're talking about, there's no shame in getting stuff wrong. It's all learning. It's all great advice. And if you're open and aware, making sure that plan has some flexibility to it is really, really important.
Yeah.
Being aware of the environment and culture around you is essential, because actually you can have a very, very fixed idea, be committed to it, but if you don't lift your head up, actually you'll realize that the market, the audience has changed completely.
Yeah.
So the business isn't going to work.
Yeah.
So I think just being aware, sensory, look at the competition you have, benchmark everything that's out there, who's succeeding, who's not, making sure those roles and goals are very, very locked, you know, at the start of the business. So the founding principles and the founders are very important to that.
Yeah.
You know? And that could be two of you in a kitchen. So many brilliant businesses are founded and thought about just through adverse effects. This could work.
Yeah.
You know, I think if you push through that, there's layering in terms of technology and resource and help, and get advice, talk to people around you, whether that's from a mentoring perspective or just getting good people in and around the business in some sort of advisory capacity. Because unlike mom and dads who say you're brilliant and say everything's great, they'll give you some tough love too.
Yeah.
And that's what's really important.
Yeah. So, with the utmost respect, and I say it even about myself and most of the guests I've had, you know, I consider you from a, let's say, a normal background.
Absolutely.
You know, I'm not from a privileged background. You're not. I'm not saying I've had it hard. I'm not saying you had it hard. I'm just saying we've not come from a silver spoon type thing. But you've gone on to be a success, and I'm not just talking about financially with coming out of exiting a few companies, etc. But you're educated, you're articulate, and I think the most important thing is you've got a great network. And I think the old saying is your net worth is determined by your network. So there's lots of people, lots of organisations, lots of different key individuals in different sectors that you're quite connected with. So this brings me on to where you are right now. So I know you've been in the art space for some time, or had an affiliation to it. I actually had two guys on my podcast who own the unit in London.
Oh, yeah, Joe and Johnny, yeah.
Yeah, that was a really good podcast, and I really was thankful they gave me the time, because I like to speak to like-minded people in the same sort of sector, and I've got nothing bad to say about them guys.
Yeah.
Their brand's really, really cool. So you've worked with them, you've worked with some galleries before. Tell me a bit more about the art space that you found yourself in.
Well, I think in terms of that sort of cross-pollination, as you talked about, network is very interesting. There's no grand plan. I think from early days, I've always had a personal love and affinity with art. And, that wasn't necessarily kind of leveraged because there was one gallery in my hometown. It wasn't until I got to kind of starting to work and doing my degree that I looked at a lot more fine art, looked at a lot more the academic and history side of art, which was beautiful. So, there's always a thirst and there's a learning, but it's a powerful space. That cross-pollination, as we talked about, if you've got value from sector to sector, I started doing a lot of work in fashion, and, my primary value there was actually probably bringing technology over from advertising or building tools that perhaps not utilized within that vertical. So I think then you can create a difference for yourself. And the art world is a fascinating space, but it's been run, on a model that's from, I guess, the 60s or 70s for a long time. And that's not denigrating that. It's a great model and it works brilliantly well. But it's traditionally gallery-led, and the way sales are managed, the way that they're modeled financially is pretty much the same. Joe and Johnny, you mentioned, are brilliant guys, because I think one of their pioneering spirits was really leveraging social media effectively and building community and understanding how that can actually change from consideration to conversion of sales, and they've done that brilliantly. So yes, I worked closely with the guys involved in their Mayfair Gallery too, and they're exceptional individuals who are doing very well, but we'll go on to new spaces. And interesting with the guys, and the same as Woodbury, I think they don't like being tied down to the word gallery because it's quite restricting. It's a beautiful thing, but actually they're doing more. So the unification of unit is actually a much wider community-based thing, which is important. So I think if we tag art itself from a gallery perspective, I was very lucky to work with Louis Vuitton and managed a lot of artist programs and the art talks. And that was, again, unprecedented access where we'll be physically building products. But the scale of the organization and Mr. Arnault means that you have a much wider communication platform. So good ideas can be transferred. That's how it worked.
Yeah. So we got introduced together via Chloe.
Yes.
roughly about a year ago, I would say, we had a few meetings at the Groucho Club. I think you actually came here originally to speak to Woodbury House, to speak to Dark Circle Clothing, which I'm an investor into. And it was only, by chance I started talking to you about what we're doing here and the space that we found ourselves in. And I think you found it fairly compelling. And then obviously over a certain time, there was, exchange of value, was giving us a lot of value, a bit of mentoring, I guess I would call it. And now you come on board. What did you see in like Woodbury, and what did you see in the space that we are in, to feel kind of compelled that you wanted to be a part of the journey?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the founders are amazing people. That's yourself as well, Steve.
Cheers.
So I think the principles are there. You're living it every day, so you work extraordinarily hard. To have that kind of commitment is great. I think, you're outsiders in the art world, which is something that's, something you constantly refer to. But I think you're very much part of a new establishment. You don't have a traditional art background, and that's a real advantage in this space because you come with different skill sets, and that's really, really important. I think you operate really as a 21st century art house. So it's more of a Warholian model, if you will, where I think this is about culture and about environment and about nurturing talent of all kinds. So it's not just about selling work, it's about showcasing, but it's also creating a space where you can nurture, encourage, and inspire. And that's really, really interesting. I think also you love technology. So the fact that the outputs aren't necessarily a white wall, is really, really powerful. You embrace the internet, you've built a fantastic retail platform, which is just starting to happen. But I think being able to leverage commercial works, ensuring that artists and their IP have actually a wider opportunity for commercial growth is really, really important. And I think young artists really relate to that because that's the world that they work within. A gallery, a show, an exhibition is amazing. It's a thing of beauty. But actually, it's only one spoke on the wagon wheel, I think, these days.
Yeah.
So understanding how you can provide a wider platform communication is very much, I think, about what Woodbury is doing. And that's great. The fact that it's uncomfortable for you to tie yourself down as one organization is really fine. Just in the same way that we said earlier, it's okay to not know quite what you're doing. The commitment to, in particular, Hambleton is there, which is amazing. One of the best untold stories ever, for sure. And that's something I know that you've got a personal heart. So seeing the love and the passion, the deep appreciation for art is also quite humbling. So I think you have that. So there's still a thirst for knowledge, and that keeps the organization relevant and it keeps it moving forward. You're not following a 90s gallery model by any means, and nor should you be. And, it's a great privilege to be on board because I think building technology as a baseline for Woodbury is a powerful thing because from that, it's an enabler. We can do anything from there. So whether that moves into retail, whether that's wider, virtual elements, and I don't mean kind of 360 trip arounds, they've been overdone. The wider art world and industry is really embracing technology, partly as a force mechanic through COVID, but I think they're realizing that there are different ways to garner community and sales and then start to look at an audience in a more strategic manner. Yeah. Rather than just hoping someone might turn up for a private view.
Yeah. We started our journey, as I mentioned, 2014 as a brand. We done our first show in Dubai, weirdly enough, because we just found an opportunity there with a big restaurant stroke gallery called La Catena des Foibois, which is a very successful restaurant. Actually, the first one's from Paris, and they opened up a second one in one of the Emirates Towers over in Dubai. That was successful. We were the first company in history to take Richard Hambleton originals and limited editions to UAE. We've done a show in Mexico City with a big gallery over there over the Formula One weekend, which was very exciting. Forbes, the publication, picked it up, which was a big deal for us. We never had a PR company. We never even knew what PR was back then. I mean, I've got to admit, I've only really learned what PR is in the last probably 3 years. It's just that I didn't, wasn't part of my world. And we've done multiple collaborations over here. Going back to Dark Circle, we've done a few collaborations with them, including with the Richard Hambleton IP. We've been in loads of different publications, big household name ones to the small little boutique, ones. And it's just been a great journey. I think last year was a really good year for us. And I know that sounds really weird because coronavirus kicked off and there was different tier structures, there was multiple lockdowns, there was losses in, obviously in financial markets, people lost their lives. I mean, it was a horrendous time for majority of people and organisations, but we found ourselves more and more people coming into the art market to preserve their money. So they were using it as a financial instrument to not only protect their money, but to make money in uncertain times, which was great. But then we found an opportunity where we could work with you at the Saatchi Gallery at StartNet. So, you know, working at Saatchi is a big deal. If you get them to kind of, you know, endorse your brand and endorse your artists and endorse the artworks, it really takes things from here to here. So your take, you know, Saatchi, how big of a deal was that for us?
I think it was a pivotal point, but one I saw as a very natural evolution. I mean, the Saatchi brand is a very powerful brand that denotes confidence, certainly, and a level of validation space is significant. I think that was a group show by definition, and I think without doubt it was probably Woodbury Showcase was easily the best within the house.
Yeah,
that's a powerful thing. So I think that's the first step on a staircase. I think looking forward to group shows, if we look at the gentrification of what was graffiti to street art to kind of urban contemporary, that 10-year span has seen huge changes.
Yeah,
and I think we're hitting a second wave now of perhaps urban contemporary work. I think there'll be many more showcases and probably more exhibitions, potentially even group exhibitions from Woodbury, which is really exciting. And I think you have a vested interest in being centre stage in that process.
Yeah, for sure. Well, as you well know, we're storytelling. You know, we've not come from the per se art typical background. We've not studied art. We just found ourselves in this space promoting and working and developing the Richard Hambleton market. But sadly, you know, he passed away just like his predecessors, and there's now precursors which are out there, which we're trying to, you know, shine the spotlight on them. I've interviewed recently Out Diaz, which used to go by the name of Samo, used to be painting partners with Jean-Michel Basquiat.
Yeah.
Cope 2, which is definitely a thoroughbred graffiti street artist that used to tag and dub certain train lines, and he used to corner those train lines as his, and he became, let's say, locally famous because of that. He's worked with Adidas, Converse, a list of large corporations. Interviewed Crash, with another good guy, some art collectors, etc. And what we're trying to do there is connect the dots. You know,
Sure.
Jean-Michel Basquiat and Keith Haring are kind of the leaders and pioneers as far as how big the market has gone. Hambleton is right on their, you know, on their heels. Obviously, his market's going up, and I believe that these are the next people that to be looking at. And we are talking potentially about doing some kind of group show in the future. So, a question for you then is, Hambleton's market, where do you see it going? And then after Hambleton's market, how do you see these affiliates following the same sort of line?
Great question. I think the data tells the truth. Obviously, if we look back to a rewind, I guess back to kind of early to mid 80s, when sort of Richard Hambleton, Keith Haring, you know, and certainly Jean-Michel Basquiat were painting, you know, in the same town, providing same work. You know, that was a very, very important time, probably on the back of the AIDS epidemic.
Yeah.
Great work came out of that, which was really street, again, a process of culture and environment through music. Collaborations were happening. That word didn't really exist. But it was a great time for energy. So out of what was a terrible situation on the background of AIDS, great work was starting to appear. Richard, I think, it's a very poignant story, a beautiful story. He had many ups and downs. You know, the only mistake, I think, from a career perspective he had was dying much later, you know, which sounds glib. But if we look at that kind of tale, 3-4 years after his passing, the numbers are starting to mirror that of Jean-Michel and Haring, which is very interesting.
Yeah.
You know, certainly from an investment perspective, ROI is heading to the top right of the chart. There's no question about that. You know, the numbers that we're seeing are very powerful and significant from an auction perspective. But also, I think the work has a greater window. People are more aware of Richard's output, and that's still a journey that I think Woodbury House is on, and one of the pioneering spirits, along with the great work that Kavan and Andy are doing at Untitled 1. You know, there's still a great story to tell. The narrative is really, really powerful. So I think when you're looking at ROI from an investment perspective, it's a solid bet, no question. You know, I think my heart and head together would hope that perhaps there's also kind of an ROE, return on engagement there too. So I think actually being around art is a really powerful thing, you know, on a personal level in terms of health. Of course, it's an investment and it's if we benchmark that against other class assets, is performing extraordinarily well. So it's nice to know that you're kind of underwriting your heart with your head. That's a good thing. Hambleton in that space is very powerful. And I think as we're seeing, a big surge in terms of the urban contemporary market, it's a great thing to do.
So I know we've in private conversations, you've never called yourself a per se art collector, but you have, got pieces of art in your portfolio. If you wouldn't mind sharing some of the stuff that you've collected over the years or purchased.
Yeah, it's interesting, the word collector and buyer. I mean, I think what's really fascinating now when we look at the accessibility of art, which is something that's very much core to you and Joe at Woodbury, making art more accessible isn't just making it cheaper, it's actually understanding what it is and how it can be defined. And that's a really, really important thing. So art is really for enthusiasts, it's for fans, it's for followers, it's for buyers, it's for collectors, and more likely it's for investors. So that's kind of life. You can access art at any point in that journey, and that's really, really important. I think early days for me, I did love art. I couldn't articulate that and didn't quite understand why, but I was drawn to it and I was inspired by it. I didn't perhaps have access to everything that I wanted to learn, but if you're interested and you're passionate about something, there's a thirst and a desire, so you learn more. And certainly a lot of the early pieces that I acquired and bought, collect is a big word. I don't think I collect. I think I do acquire, and I really appreciate the work. For me, it's very much important that I can live with work, and that's powerful. If there's a return downstream, fantastic. But that isn't really the primary motivation for me. It's about actually having something I love and appreciate and understand.
Yeah.
Early pieces probably that I would have acquired. I bought a spot very, very early on, Hearst.
Okay.
Which looking back now seems shrewd. It wasn't anything to do with that at all. Interestingly, it was a very early online gallery called iStorm. I think probably one of the pioneers. And I say online e-commerce. It was probably a website with some JPEGs that you could click on and acquire, and things would be sent. That was an early piece. I'd certainly bought some liths. I'm a huge fan of Picasso. So, numbers go up and down. So Chagall, Dufy, again, similar period. Clear sketches and some liths and prints. You'll pick up little bits of original works here and there and more contemporary.
Because I saw that one when we do the Zoom calls with the Haring one in the background.
Oh, yeah. I'm a huge fan of Keith Haring. So I'm very lucky to have some originals. And that's an interesting piece, actually, part of the Apocalypse series.
Yeah.
So that sits behind me, which is kind of a friend of the family. There are other little pieces. I think the weight and energy of Haring is fantastic because I'm a big fan of music. And so I think his involvement in and around with Larry Levan and Paradise Garage is a big motivator. So I think out of music came a lot of art and collaborations. So that, I think, is part of my DNA. So that helps my story. And seeing Keith around me kind of motivates that. I think one of my early trips to New York in probably, must be mid-80s actually, was to the pop store. So I remember standing in there myself, not realizing how lucky I was to be in that kind of presence. So that's, it comes out of graffiti. I'm a very old friend of Steve Lazaridis. Again, we connected through music via Bristol.
And for people that don't know, he was basically essentially almost like the founder or the agent of Banksy.
I think, there are lots and lots of ways to articulate that. Steve's certainly a driving force and always has been, I think, within kind of urban contemporary work. There was a hugely close affiliation. And I think, the guys work very, very closely, clearly. And there's a level of management, there's a level of partnership there. Definition isn't important, but I think, Steve was instrumental in the early career, certainly of Banksy, which is really, really powerful. And is doing incredible things now. He has a lot of wisdom and a lot of experience, and is certainly promoting the next generation of great art. So, we'll see and hear a lot more from Steve. But we were part of the same kind of music scene and part of the same art scene at early stages. So I had access again. I think, as you mentioned before, that network is really important. That the word network didn't exist. You had mates and you went to places and you were interested in stuff. That might be an opening, that might be a club night, whatever. But if you were aware and alert, things were happening there that were of interest.
Yeah.
And for me, that was as much about design, where design crossed over to art. I spent a lot of time kind of in Notting Hill in and around kind of Tom Dixon, who's a brilliant industrial and furniture designer. If we look at the work of Mark Newson, and the work he's done via Gagosian, Mark's by trade, I guess, an industrial product designer, but his work is extraordinarily artful and thoughtful. So whether that manifests itself in a Reaver speedboat, or whether it's a piece of marble that's sculpted into a table, is that a sculpture or a desk? Doesn't actually matter at all. But I think that crossover is something that really interests me. So genre breaking, moving from movement to movement, is really healthy and really powerful. And to your earlier point, that gives you the confidence to think, actually, there's no reason why I can't apply my talents in a different vertical. Just be open, and I think that level of collaboration is something we see so often now, and it's a very powerful force. So for a lot of artists, if they were given the choice of a gallery show or a collaboration, they'd probably look at a collaboration. That would be of more interest, and it starts to gain a bigger audience, which is interesting.
Well, that's part of the reason why we've had the birth of the e-commerce online store. We understand that there's so many, individuals out there that would love to be a part of the art market. Number one, they don't probably know how. Number two, they feel like, a lot of the art is out their reach. If you look at Hambleton, especially something like that, in other galleries at the moment, they will be fetching 800, 900 grand easily. Yeah. In the private domain, they are already selling for that. So when people see them sort of figures, they're like, whoa, that's totally out of my comfort zone, or I just don't have the money, which is fine. So what we're doing now is the online store is allowing people to buy a slice of art history, but at a different medium and also a lower price point. So that could be in form of merchandise, collectibles, limited editions. And we're not just going to, just do it for Hambleton or his affiliates. We're going to venture into different things. We might have bed sheets. It might be clocks. It might be, eventually, our brand is almost going to be, like a lifestyle brand. We want to go into hotels. It could be the Woodbury House Boutique Hotel, which each and every single room would be a different thing. There'll be a Jean-Michel Basquiat room, there'll be a Richard Hamilton room, there'll be an Andy Warhol room. And as you go through this hotel, you'll find yourself going through this, rabbit hole of like different exciting sort of things in history. And again, what separates us from a typical gallery, and I'm not knocking the gallery model, it's obviously played a huge part and it's very successful. We don't just go into one artist and another and then this genre and that genre. We like to become as close as we can to experts as humanly possible in one artist to begin with, and then dovetail that out into his affiliates. That's why I've interviewed all these people that knew Hambleton.
Absolutely.
And the secondary benefit of that is we're harnessing, some video assets, and it's teeing it up for a group show, basically. And I think if we can do that, I think it would be something that no one else has done.
No, I think it's a great opportunity. And to your point, I think that ecosystem is really important. So I think through your personal affiliation and now commercial, kind of work there with Richard Hambleton, you started to look wider than that. Looked at Richard's, immediate peers, and that would start obviously with Haring and Basquiat, whose numbers are kind of catastrophic in unicorn land. There's a huge sub-community that were in and around that. Brilliant talent in the UK, brilliant talent in New York, and many other cities who were inspired or working along at the same time. So I think a lot of that talent is still untapped. So there is more work to be done for sure. But I think understanding the importance of art that expresses in and around its culture and environment is kind of core to what you do as a business and what we do as a business. But it's also a very, very potent tool. So I think, moving forward to look at the wider system and potential of group shows is a very natural thing, and it will happen, I'm sure. Yeah.
So going back to someone like Steve, who was definitely instrumental in building Banksy's market. I think even yesterday there was an auction for a Banksy limited edition print. It was unsigned. I think it fetched something like £150,000. Bearing in mind, back in 2005, I think it was, there were a certain amount of prints made, limited editions again, which for the viewers is essentially, is a genuine copy, to put it kind of layman's terms to the viewers, of an original work by Banksy, the street artist. And there was hundreds of them done. Some were signed and some were unsigned. Some of the signed limited editions in auction today are fetching over 300,000. So this is not original works. This is a copy, essentially.
First run edition.
Exactly. And then you've got unsigned, which are now going over 100, 150,000. They were selling back then at 25 £25. I mean, it sounds quite ludicrous to say you could buy something for £25 and in, I don't know, 15, 20 years or whatever it may be, you can sell it now for over 100 grand. I mean, when you see them sort of numbers, Marcus, because obviously you've been around a lot longer than I have, and I mean that in a respectful way.
Yeah. I've lapped you a couple of times.
How does that make you feel when you see stuff like that?
Look, it's great. It's amazing. But I think the work wasn't produced or conceptualized with that in mind. That wasn't the exit point when the work was originated. There's so much weight and intelligence in Banksy's work. The execution is almost, irrelevant, really. I think when we see crazy auction prices, that has a domino effect clearly to premium work and the secondary market. So to your earlier point, an access point for editions or merch is a really, really powerful thing. But I think if you're looking at a work purely as an investment vehicle, it's a solid bet, but it'd be great to try and understand what you're investing in. Auction prices can go through the roof. Richard's market, as you just pointed out, is the numbers are getting kind of very significant, which is great. For anyone who's been in and around that market for several years, they're only going to see a better return, which is good. But that should be also inspiration for artists coming into the space. I think there's a level of fine art that still believes that commercial gain is kind of corrupt and wrong, and we should be in art for pain, and that doesn't always have to be the way. It's fine to make money, and it's fine to capitalize on that talent as long as it's done openly and transparently, and that's done in conjunction with the artist. I think an example of, say, look at Cause, for instance. Amazing, great work, but that really started from a toy making collection and the love of animation. So there's a very clear path through toys by definition or retail, and that gives you a bigger market. When the larger works come around that adds an increased value back to the core entity. So that starts to increase in value too. So, it's a simple process. I think numbers can get out of hand, and if that starts to make work completely inaccessible, then it starts to devalue, especially something which started out being for free and on the street for everyone to really enjoy. I was fascinated to see the latest piece out of Reading Jail, which is, I think, probably a very, very strong comment on our times and isolation, and that we can't, hold creativity captive.
Yeah. As you well know, back in the last year, I interviewed the Richard Hamilton in-house counsel, a guy called Kavan, great guy, very articulate, was a lawyer and almost became a partner or maybe a partner at Lakins & Watkins, one of the biggest law firms in the world. Me and him, even though we haven't known each other for years and years and years, I feel like, he's a genuine guy. And he explained to me that there are certain monumental things happening in 2021 which is going to drive and stimulate the Richard Hamilton market. And as you put it, it's a bit of a halo effect to his affiliates and the whole contemporary street art sector anyway. I know fully well that when we done that Saatchi show, just seeing Hamilton and Saatchi and Woodbury House all in, all on one kind of sheet, it really, really stimulated a lot of things. And a lot of people are reaching out to us from all corners of the world. I can't obviously say certain brand names at the moment because of non-disclosures, etc. But there are certain things happening this year which you're quite privy to. Vaguely, then, there are certain things that are happening. How do you think that's going to, help the market with the Richard Hamilton experience? They're talking about, maybe a second part to the documentary. Hint, hint. That kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, for anyone listening out there who hasn't seen the Hamilton documentary available on Amazon, Shadow Man. Fantastic bit of work. So I think, there will be very natural follow-ups to that piece. I think creating IP, exploitation is an interesting word because it's powerful, but it also seems rather sensitive. I think ensuring that the flight path in terms of IP and brand exploitation is done steadily and it's not done too fast to oversaturate the market is a really important thing. If you find you can make money from merch or publishing that's good, that doesn't mean that you should accelerate in those paths. I think it needs to be handled very, very strategically and carefully and sensitively. The legacy of Richard is really, really important. He's not around to defend that, so we need to be very, very respectful and protect, all of those images and ensure that there's not actually a rush to market. Any larger scale shows, Saatchi being one to your point, that creates awareness and consideration, which is always a powerful thing, providing the narratives in place. And I know that certainly with Woodbury, there are a number of assets kind of in percolation now that are really, really powerful. And that just takes the story out to a wider audience. You know, we're not mandating or insinuating that you need to be buying. It's just about actually, here's a great story that needs to be told. So textually, it opens up avenues for the ecosystem around Richard, what was happening in New York at that time, and how that influenced the rest of the world. That's still not really told, but it's a really compelling narrative, and I think it will be. So larger scale, you know, events, should we say, major exhibitions, major collaborations can only help the price of the secondary and premium market. It's turnover and turnover. It's satisfying.
So you're definitely, you know, instrumental helping Woodbury and also the Hambleton market and any project that we work on for the foreseeable future. With your own goals then, Marcus, I mean, look, you've made it yourself a success. You've achieved a lot. I know you've still got that fire in your belly to achieve more, but where do you see yourself? What do you want to achieve over the next 5 or 10 years?
I think success is an interesting word and definition of success. And I think, you know, awards and rewards, as we say, are a good way of keeping score. But once you've got past a few kind of goalposts, actually it's about making a difference. And that's really, really important. So I think, you know, harnessing creativity, putting some commercial shape and revenue on everything I do is really, really important to me. Not just for myself, but for those who sit in around me, the teams, the friendship networks. I think creating win-wins for everyone is really, really important. Rather than going out with a sole goal in mind, you know, I'm connected to the Hambleton journey, which is very powerful. And I think if we steer that in the right direction, I'd like to see an outcome on that. I think the ambition for Woodbury House to define itself, certainly as a contemporary art house, that is starting to happen now. Again, that's kind of Woodbury House. That's a major goal for us as we move forward. So I really want to take those two things through. You know, and focus rather than trying to do too many things at a low level. Focus on Hambleton, focus on Woodbury House, and I think probably look at bringing in other businesses, other sectors to complement that.
Good stuff. Well, look, I mean, we've got so much to achieve over the next few weeks and few months, and we're talking about all kinds of different projects and exciting things happening. Obviously, we want to, once the gates are back open, we want to take a first flight in many years to New York to get some content going over there, connect with art dealers, other artists, and start telling the story from New York soil.
Yeah, I think the Night London thing is so important. You know, there are certainly within the space. There is work happening everywhere, but I think New York is a very interesting trigger point and focal. So I think seeing Woodbury in New York is certainly a goal of mine, and I think potentially a collective opportunity for us moving forward next year.
Yeah, definitely. Right, one more thing, Marcus. Yes. So when I finish my podcast, I always say to people, what is your interpretation of be happy, never content?
It's good. I think always be restless. Always be curious, I think, is kind of the key thing for me. Be open-minded and always be looking for new opportunities. Never get content, always look forward like a shark. If you look back and you get too happy with what you've done, you get lazy quite quickly. Things are moving around you. Just be awake. Turn up for life and great stuff happens.
Yeah, I love that saying, turn up for life. Cool. All right. Thank you for your time, mate.
Steve,
this is going to be out in the next few weeks. It's going to be on my podcast, YouTube. It's also going to be on Woodbury Houses. This is part of not only the Stephen Sully study, talking about entrepreneurial kind of journeys and the ups and downs of being, let's say, a go-getter, but also part of the art series that Woodbury House are putting together. We're probably going to break down these interviews as well into snippets, into sound bites, and Mark is definitely going to be part of that. And just watch this space. We've got so much happening. We've got so much to look forward to. COVID has given us a lot of time to get our ducks in a row, reinforce, establish our foundations. And when we come out of the blocks, we're going to come out fighting really, really hard. So look out. It's going to be an exciting year for us.
Indeed.
Right. Thank you very much. And be happy, never content. Nice one.
Thanks, Steve.
Cheers.